The passive voice in English is one of the most mistaught features of the English classroom around the world. The problem isn't usually to do with how to make the passive. We'll come back to that in a minute. The problem is understanding when to use it and why we use it. So often, the passive is taught as if it were a mechanical operation, a process, a formula that can be applied to any active sentence to turn it, hey presto, into a corresponding passive. Well, it isn't like that. If you think like that as a student of English, then you were badly taught and you need to think again. And if you think like that as a teacher of English, then I'm sorry to say this, but you are a bad teacher, at least in that respect. Let's get rid of this idea. If your textbook was written by someone who thinks you can just magically turn any active sentence into a passive sentence, throw out the textbook. If your teacher thinks like that, change your teacher if you can. If you can't, and you have to pass tests that assume such a thing, then, I'm sorry, you just have to go ahead and apply the formula, but at least understand that that is not how we use English. It's not how English is spoken. So, let's start at the beginning and look at the basic how to form the passive. The basic passive is pretty simple, really. Here's a sentence in active voice. The boy ate the apple. The boy is the subject, ate is the verb. In this case, it's in the past simple form, and apple is the object. If we want to express this idea in the passive, there are 4 obligatory steps we have to take and 1 optional step. The first step is to kick out the subject of the verb. The second step is to take the object of the verb and put it in subject position. The third step is to add the appropriate form of the verb to be. In this case, the verb is past simple and the subject is third person singular, so the correct form of be here is was. And the fourth step is to change the verb to the past participle form, so ate becomes eaten. The apple was eaten. The fifth optional step is to add the word by and put in the original subject of the active sentence. So you get the apple was eaten by the boy. In this case, the boy is what we call an agent, and the apple is a patient or recipient. So why is this important? Why talk about agents and patients in this way? Why not just talk about subjects and objects? Well, as I say, making the passive is fairly simple and straightforward, and we can use this basic process, this mechanism, if you like, to make thousands, millions of passive sentences. The problem is that many of those passive sentences, although they may be grammatically correct, are very strange sounding and unnatural. If students want to learn English as the language is actually used, then they need to start thinking about the passive in a different way. This is where we need to understand why we use the passive voice. This comes down to what we're focusing on when we speak. If we say, the boy ate the apple, then we're focusing on the boy and what the boy did. If we say, the apple was eaten, then we're focusing on the apple and what happened to it. The boy is the agent doing something to the apple, and the apple is the patient having something done to it. So if we're basically talking about the boy, we'd use the active form, and if we're talking about the apple, we'd use the passive. Take a look at the following video. Look at the woman with the headband. We can say, she's pouring the water. But we can also focus on what's happening to the water and say, the water is being poured. And what about the little boy? He's drinking the water. But we can also say, the water is being drunk. and he's opening the bottle. So we can say the bottle is being opened. We can look at all of these from the point of view of the agent, the woman pouring the water, the boy drinking the water, the man opening the bottle, or from the point of view of the patient, the water being poured, the water being drunk, the bottle being opened. In the case of the water, we can see that something is happening to the water. It's being poured, it's being drunk. And something is happening to the bottle. It's being opened. And in this situation too, someone is felling the tree. Something is clearly happening to the tree, so we can say the tree is being felled. But what about this situation? A monkey is climbing a tree. But the monkey isn't really doing anything to the tree. Nothing's really happening to the tree. It would sound rather strange to say the tree is being climbed. We can think of the monkey as doing something in the tree, but it isn't really doing anything to the tree. The person who fells a tree is an agent doing something to the tree, but the monkey isn't an agent in the same way. What about this? Some people are repairing the road. They're doing something to the road. We can see that something is happening to the road, so we can say the road is being repaired. But look at this. Someone is crossing the road, but that person isn't really doing anything to the road. Nothing is really happening to the road. In this situation, we wouldn't normally say the road is being crossed. And this is why I think we need to talk about agent and patient here, rather than subject and object. The workers are repairing the road, and the man is crossing the road, have the same subject, verb, object, grammatical structure, but one of them can be expressed very naturally in the passive, while the other sounds strange. That doesn't mean that we can never form passives in those kinds of situations. Obviously, trees can be climbed and roads can be crossed. It's possible for an agent, someone or something, to do those things to trees and roads, which would then become patients. But in a lot of contexts, it would be strange to think of trees being climbed and roads being crossed as patients. Perhaps the clearest example of the difference between agents and patients and subjects and objects is the case of a verb like have. We can say she has a car, but she's clearly not an agent. She isn't doing anything to the car just by having it. And if we treat the car as a patient and say the car is had by her, that sounds pretty odd. But all we're really doing here is identifying a problem area. Understanding the idea of agent and patient doesn't give us a one-size-fits-all solution. There are still plenty of exceptions and difficulties. For example, if everyone at the party had a good time, we can say a good time was had by all. And even if we can't say the car is had by her, it sounds pretty reasonable to say that it is owned by her. So we still don't have all the answers, but at least we can see where there are likely to be problems. If we can clearly identify an agent doing something and a patient having something done to it, then we can be fairly sure that we can make a passive sentence using the patient as a subject. And if we can't identify an agent and a patient, then perhaps we should avoid using the passive in those situations, at least until we've checked it out and found out what native speakers would say in such cases. So, if you're learning to use the English passive, please think about whether something is really happening to the object before you use the passive voice. And if you're teaching English or setting language tests, please try to make sure that you're using examples where there is a clear agent and a clear patient, and avoid examples that are strange and unusual and which a native speaker would not be likely to use. There are many more things that need to be said about the passive voice, and I'll be talking about those in other videos. So please subscribe to my channel and follow my updates on this topic.